Greetings everyone. I have moved on to Beijing, China. So I'm now here in Sanlitun, or how a Beijing person would say Sanlitor. So there's a thick Beijing specific accent here, which I'm personally not able to speak. By the way, another Neo here, but that's not the topic of today's video. And I know I possibly shouldn't talk politics on this channel, but I kind of feel I have to. Because it also relates to investments into Chinese equities, of course, which are largely driven these days by politics, but also about the issue, of course, with the financial system. And I think what just happened the other day will have a big impact, or there was a new big sign regarding the importance of the US dollar as a reserve currency, and also, this more bigger topic of rebalancing of power in the world. And by the way, this is one of the main shopping districts here. It's usually busy at the weekends. Now it is during a weekday, just normally not that packed, I would say, but I'm having a lunch date here soon. And by the way, the sky in the background you see is largely blue today, which is surprising because yesterday when I landed, there was actually a big sandstorm. Anyway, back to the point of my video. Talking about what just happened with Macron's visit to China here, meeting President Xi and going with him on a little journey to Guangzhou. And then afterwards, I think you've seen it in the media, there was a big shitstorm, right, around the topic that Macron said we shouldn't follow, us Europeans shouldn't blindly follow the United States into a confrontation with China about Taiwan, but also just more in general, depending on the US dollar and the sole leadership of the United States. And I have to say, by the way, I retweeted that a lot on Twitter. Follow me there, _MM85, because I'm European and I really liked what Macron did there. You can't believe what kind of comments I usually get. Of course, people call me out as a CCP shill or whatever. But all that I'm saying here on this channel is totally free. The only people who are financing us are the patrons. So, by the way, thanks again for supporting us on Patreon, everybody. And I'm just saying out loud what I'm thinking. So there's nobody briefing me, and I'm just have to say that I'm very happy that Macron said this, because I also think that lately Europe hasn't been caring too much about their own needs or its own needs, and was not in a position, or trying to get into a position, where Europe is following its own values and creating business relations with China, the US and the rest of the world independently. I think that was particularly the case after the Ukraine crisis started with the invasion of Russia, which had this effect that, of course, the West was a little bit more strengthening together. And I'm not going to judge this as a reaction. The only thing is that I also don't think a unilateral power position. By the way, this is the Baidu Robotaxi store here. Let me see if I can show you a little bit more from the outside. Yeah, there are the showcast, the Jidu Robotaxis by Baidu. And so this unilateral power view that we have in the world currently, with the US leading, I think is not going to last throughout the century, to be frank. So I think this is a big investment topic in the very long term, because what we're seeing right now that is happening is, especially in a time where we have this risk-off moves, which means reducing risk in portfolios, and sort of a financial crisis with the US banks collapsing, and a flight of safety into the US dollar. I do think that this is a short-term reaction and effect that I think, must reverse at some point in time. And that means the counter trade to that would be to be not only exposure to emerging market equities, and with that also Chinese equities, but I think actually, frankly, even other regions in the world, including Europe and maybe other parts of the global south, or whatever you might call it. Because if you see it, we have this highly financialized system that is largely dominated by the US, but I do think that the valuations paying a premium for US equities only is not longer adequate, because you can always say, yes, you invest in what you know, and there is less risk in US names. But frankly, if you think about it, let's say the US and China are going to have a hot war and a confrontation, a physical confrontation about Taiwan, or might be something else. Do you think that this will not only have impacts on Chinese companies, but also on US equities, or the underlying fundamentals of the companies like Apple or Tesla? Of course it will. And it will have drastic effects for the entire world. Yet still, we only discount this worst case scenario for the Chinese equities. We don't do that for the 40% of revenues that are coming from many, many US companies and European companies that are made actually in China. And what I'm trying also to show you here on my journey here in China is, you know, the way China really is. Like, in terms of everything here is quite real, and it's not always as bad as it's projected in the media, but also not everything is great. So this is China, but there is also a very, very different China. Like, if you only go outside like 20 kilometers from here, it will look much rougher than here, right? But it's still a truth and a matter of fact that China is becoming a heavyweight economically. And the fact that Macron finally also kind of stands up with a position and saying, look, we Europeans cannot ignore that and cannot only follow one lead, and we actually need to find our own position. I think that was a smart move. Whether or not he's now getting bashed in the media for it, as becoming kind of someone promoting Xi Jinping or whatever, right? I really don't care about this media bashing, because I think it was actually the right thing to do. And I think we Europeans really need to think a little bit of what our answer is to all of these challenges in the world currently, and what could be a unique power position, including building up our financial system in Europe as well. Because I do think China is exactly doing that. They are very calm in their rise, and I think over time they know playing the long game. This change is irreversible, and they just have so much economic power in the future and already today that I think it will also turn the financial system. So this is kind of my long shot here, why I think once this short-term movement in terms of a risk-off trade is over, possibly when they stop hiking rates, and you know, the banks can finally accept risk again. I think by that time, or maybe even a little bit later, there will be the recognition and more of a, let's say, truth-seeking moment regarding valuations of these companies here. Because you cannot just ignore it, you cannot just keep on writing media articles about this and pretending that all of this doesn't exist and the Chinese consumer doesn't exist, and China is not a big part of producing all of this and you know, playing this role in the world. And I think Macron realized this and started to kind of get this reaction up and going. And so here it is, not about promoting somebody else overtaking in power, but rather about a more balanced world in which I think we will have different power centers, maybe also a bigger equilibrium, if you can call it like this, in terms of what can be the reserve currency. I'm actually not sure of what's going to be the role of the Chinese yuan and if it can take a big role or not. But what I can be sure about, at least that's my personal views, is that we cannot longer accept the status quo about what it is today. I think we're in a big transition period, and I do think that on the long run, Chinese and emerging market equities and maybe even European equities will benefit from this trend that the valuations that are accepted by investors globally need to become more in line and adequate to what's the reality. And the reality is what I'm trying to show you here on the ground. So enough of a monologue about politics. I thought it's important to get this message out there. Thanks for watching and for your support.